Good morning, everybody. I just want to let everybody know that I miss my church family. I miss being in church. I don't like being stuck at home on the weekends. I'm lost. I miss all my choir buddies and singing in the choir. But right now I'm going to do a Sunday school lesson. Before the coronavirus started, we were in the middle of a series in the book of Daniel. And today would have been the last lesson in the book, but we missed a lot of good stuff. So for this lesson, I just want to go back and capture up through Daniel 8. So if y'all remember back in Daniel 1, Nebuchadnezzar went in and captured Israel. They took over Jerusalem. They took all the Israelites into captivity for a number of years. And they took a lot of the furnishings and vessels out of the temple in Jerusalem. And if y'all remember, when they took into captivity the Jerusalem or the Israelites, he wanted to take, Nebuchadnezzar wanted to take the best and the brightest young men in the land to serve in his court. And Daniel and 3 of his friends were amongst those best and brightest young men. So y'all remember their names. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then Daniel they were sent off to college to be trained to serve in Nebuchadnezzar's court. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Now we're into Daniel 2. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and back then dreams meant something. Today we just kind of dismiss a dream as, well, we ate pizza too late, and it doesn't really mean anything. But back then dreams did mean something. So Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and he wanted someone to interpret those dreams. So he called in the best and the brightest young men. First he called in the magicians, and he called in the soothsayers, or the ones that would be able to give him the answers, or he thought would be able to give him the answers that he was looking for. They were not able to do that. So then he calls in Daniel, and Daniel was able to not only tell Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was, but to also interpret that dream. And Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that you saw, or you dreamed about a statue that was destroyed by a stone. Well, the statue actually represents the different kingdoms or empires in the world. And Nebuchadnezzar's empire was actually the head of the statue. And Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that this stone will destroy all these empires, including yours. So Nebuchadnezzar was thrilled that Daniel was able to tell him the dream and the interpretation. Even though it wasn't good news to the king, he was still thrilled that he was able to understand what it meant. So Daniel gets a huge promotion. And when Daniel gets this promotion to this high position, he brings his friends and he gives them positions as well, positions in power. And so they went on their everyday life, and they were overseeing the day-to-day business of Babylon. All right, so now we're into Daniel 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Y'all remember the story about how Nebuchadnezzar put up a statue, a gold statue, and wanted everybody to worship the statue. Well, these 3 Hebrew boys would not. They knew that it was not right. So they would not worship the statue, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace, but they were not destroyed. God went into the furnace with them and delivered them from that furnace. So now we're into Daniel 4. And he had another dream. And it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, dreamt of a tree cut down, stripped of its leaves and branches, and only a stump remains. Well, he calls in Daniel again to interpret this dream, because nobody else could interpret it for him. So Daniel comes in, and he tells him that he is the tree that is being cut down. Nebuchadnezzar is. And he explains to him that you're going to go mad. Your own people are going to cast you out, and you'll live in the woods like an animal, and you'll eat grass like an ox. And a year later, that actually did happen. Nebuchadnezzar did go mad, and he was cast out of the city. And he stayed in the woods for a period of time. It was 7 years. And he did live like an animal. But then after the 7 years was up, God restored him, and he came back, and he took back over his empire. All right, so now we're into Daniel 5, and here we're going to fast forward into the future a little bit. We've got a new Babylonian ruler, and it's King Belshazzar, and he is actually a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. So he is throwing a big party. He loves to live it up, drink, get drunk, and he is in the middle of doing that. And while this party is going on, he actually calls for them to bring the vessels that were captured out of the temple in Jerusalem. And he's going to use these vessels to drink from, to worship his Babylonian gods with, and he's going to defile God's holy vessels. We are God's holy vessels. Do not let anyone defile you. Do not defile yourself. You keep yourself sanctified and set apart for God's purpose and God's use only. But this king, Belshazzar, he defiled God's vessels. So while this party was going on and he was in the middle of defiling God's vessels, there was a magical hand or a mystic hand that wrote something on the wall. And this writing on the wall could not be understood by anybody at the party or by the king himself. It was kind of coded. So he called in Daniel, and he asked Daniel to decode the message on the wall. Well, Daniel did that. And the message itself, Daniel explained to him, said that his kingdom would be given over to the Medes and the Persians. And Belshazzar actually was killed later on that night, and Darius, the Mede, actually took over. So Daniel was a prophet, and his prophecies came true. Sometimes they came true a year later, and sometimes they came true that very night. And that was the case in Daniel 5. So now we're into Daniel 6. And Daniel here, even though the Medes took over, Darius the Mede took over, Daniel still retained a high position. He was actually one of 3 presidents that ruled the land. And those 3 presidents had governors that worked under them. So those governors and the other presidents, because Daniel was so favored, they were so jealous of him. And jealousy makes us do some bad things. So these other presidents and the governors, they actually plotted against Daniel. So they talked the king into passing a law that no one could pray any longer in the land. Now we all know that Daniel was a praying man, and that he was going to pray. He was not going to stop. And that's exactly what happened. He kept praying. And we all know the story that because he kept praying, he was thrown into the lion's den. And again, God came to the rescue. God has a plan. And just because the king is jealous, or a president is jealous and plots against you, it does not mean that God is going to let him be successful. All right, so now God closed the mouths of the lions, and Daniel is saved. He is spared. So now we go into chapter 7, and this is the last chapter we're going to cover today. So chapter 7 actually goes back in time. It's a flashback. And don't you hate movies that are flashbacks? Sometimes they're hard to follow. And that's part of the reason why the book of Daniel is hard to follow. But chapter 7 is actually a flashback back to when Belshazzar was still ruling, not Darius. This was before the Medes took over, and Belshazzar was still ruling. So Daniel had a vision about this. This flashback was a vision that was given to Daniel. And in this vision, he saw 4 winds. And winds actually represent turmoil or agitation or unrest. So he saw 4 winds, and there were 4, he saw the 4 winds over the sea. And the sea actually represents people. You've heard the saying, there's a sea of people out there, or I see a sea of humanity. Well, the sea actually represents people. So this unrest, this agitation was over the sea, over the people. And so out of that, out of the people, came 4 beasts. And these animals were unlike any animal that we've ever seen before. And if y'all remember, if y'all didn't know this, but there's lots of countries or nations that have animals represent that nation. For instance, the United States, our animal is the bald eagle. And so there are different empires or kingdoms or countries that animals represent. So these 4 beasts are empires or representatives of empires. And they're unlike any empire we've ever seen before. They're coming. They have not been before, but they're coming. So let's talk about the beast just for a second. So the first beast was a lion with eagle's wings and is given a human heart. The second beast is a bear chewing on 3 ribs. A voice tells the bear to arise and devour much flesh. Then the third beast is a leopard with 4 bird wings and 4 heads. And the fourth beast is the worst of all. It has teeth like iron, and it tramples and it crushes and it devours. And out of this fourth beast, he has 10 horns. Now, out of the 10 horns, there is a little horn that pops up. And that little horn is an arrogant little horn. It likes to yap, 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 runs its mouth. And it also has eyes like a human. So it's a little horn that has eyes like a human, and it's very arrogant. And he comes up and he knocks out 3 of the other 10 horns. So this little horn is actually the Antichrist, and he is starting his rise. This little horn is going to speak against God. It's going to persecute the Jews and mess with their laws and their holidays or their holy days. That's what holiday means, is holy days. And yes, this little horn is going to rise up. But I can tell you right now that it's only going to be for a season, just for a little while. God's coming back. And when he does, he appears. Now, in this vision, God appears on a throne with 10,000 times 10,000 angels around him serving him. This divine court is in session, and God is sitting on the throne, and he's opening up the law books. So that little horn, yes, the little horn is still there when God comes, but he keeps yapping away. He's arrogant. He keeps yapping away. And this fourth beast that contains this arrogant little horn shall be destroyed, and the little horn is put to death. God is so powerful that no matter how big a kingdom is, or how powerful on earth kings are, no matter how high up they sit in power, God's kingdom is much more powerful. God is so much more powerful. So Daniel sees this one like a human, is what the scripture says, who comes with the clouds of heaven, on a cloud. And when he arrives, he gets at the feet of God. And God is called the Ancient of Days because he's been forever. He is forever. He forever will be. He's the Ancient of Days. And this one like a human is at the feet of God. And God gives him dominion over all the beasts, all the empires, all the powers that be. God gives him that dominion over that. And his kingdom will not pass away. It will never be destroyed. It will be forever. So this is the very same God that lives within us, the very same God that gives us that same power because he does dwell in us. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world, right? So this vision is terrifying to Daniel. It's so terrifying that he passes out. He becomes unconscious. His face turns pale. And, you know, when he comes back to, he's thinking about this. Well, let's go back and think about this little horn for a second. It says it's a little horn. It arises up out of the people. So that means that this little horn is going to start off, it's going to come from amongst the people. And it's going to start off small and insignificant. And it's going to rise into power. He has a mouth that speaks great things. He knows how to capture people's attention. He knows how to win people over. He's going to be charismatic. He's going to be clever. Man, he's smart. And he's going to push out the 3 other kings in power. He's going to exalt himself above all, including God. He's going to put himself in God's place, and people are going to worship him because he comes in and he seems to have all the answers. He seems to know what he's talking about and know what he's doing. and he sets up new moral laws. He wipes out God's moral laws, and he sets up his own. Does that sound familiar? Today, laws are being changed, and what used to be good is now evil, and what used to be evil is now good. Things are in motion. So even if this Antichrist is not, this little horn, this Antichrist is not in the world today, there's a spirit of Antichrist in the world today. And we need to be watchful. We need to be ready. Don't look for him. Look for God. Look for the coming of the Lord. Look for the return of Jesus Christ himself. We should be watching and waiting. So next lesson we'll do chapter 8 and 9 and wrap up the series in Daniel. But I hope this blesses your heart. And I love you guys and I miss you so much.